There's a great quote by author Alex Haley. In every conceivable manner, our family is the link to our past and the bridge to our future. But what does that mean, though? What exactly are these links to the past? And how does understanding our past become a bridge to the future? What I do know is that when we learn the details of our family, their triumphs, their failures, their loves, their losses, we begin to understand something about who we are. Today, we're going to get into how understanding our past can help us shape a stronger future. And my goal for you is simple. I want you to carry on stronger because of it. Welcome to another episode of the Leading Life Podcast, where we talk practical wisdom for leadership and life. I'm your host, Andy Zook, and I've learned that leadership is about how we show up for people, how we navigate change, and how we continue growing. Right now on today's episode, what are you carrying forward? You are listening to the Leading Life Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Zook. And as I always promise, no fluff here, no empty motivation, and certainly no cookie cutter advice. If this connects with you, please use it, because I want to give you something real, something actionable that you can use to become better at what you do and better at the very life you are living right now. Because one of the greatest gifts family gives us is roots, identity, and continuity. And so with that, I want to tell you a little story about my great uncle, Martin. It was spring break 1987. I was about 17 years old, and my parents decided we would take a road trip, driving across the country from Maryland to North Dakota. We were going to spend the Easter holiday with my mother's parents. I'm not sure how one describes the small town they're from in North Dakota. It's called Beach. It's the farthest thing from a beach you could ever imagine. It's a farming community, slowly losing its population over time due to farms being automated and things like that. But it's a very small town, probably only about 45 minutes from the border of Montana and a couple hours going north from Canada. For me, it was very unusual. I grew up right outside the metropolis of Washington, D.C., and to me it was the center of the world. Often I thought if the bomb dropped, we would be the number one target. Even though we were nearing the dissolution of the Cold War, it didn't feel like it, and it was something always in the back of our minds. But growing up around Washington felt like a sense of cultural enlightenment, of strong history, and a lot of very educated minds around me. So arriving in Beach felt a little bit like going back in time. And for the week, I was pretty bored out of my mind. The days went by slowly. One thing I do remember that week was Mother and I doing a devotional for the 14 Stations of the Cross at the Catholic Church where my parents had got married. That was about as exciting as it got. The day after Easter Sunday, my mother informed me that her and my father were going to drive to visit a relative in Montana, and I would spend the day with Mom's uncle, Martin. This was not pleasing news to me at 17. Spending the day with an 80-year-old man in a nursing home sounded like teenage purgatory, but I agreed. And actually, I was pretty happy to see him and meet more extended members of my family. And half the battle had been won, honestly, when she told me that Uncle Martin used to be a drummer in a jazz band. Being a drummer myself, that piqued my curiosity. So I gave a shy smile as we arrived at Golden Valley Manor, and she walked me to his room, introduced me, and waved goodbye. And so I spent the afternoon listening to a man who had grown up in a completely different time, a completely different era, something I had only seen in TV or movies. And I heard stories of dance halls filled with big band music and the way that ladies and gentlemen courted back then and dated and decided who they would marry. Stories of huddling around the radio in the evenings just to hear the latest news during World War II. Stories about trying to make your way as a farmer in North Dakota, and stories about the sadness and the hardship of the Great Depression. But something happened during those hours. The older man sitting in front of me stopped simply being just another old man. He had been young once. He had played music. He had struggled. He had worked. He had worried. He had lived through enormous changes in history that I would probably never see. He had dreams before I was even born. And suddenly his life didn't feel like it was separate from mine. Before I knew it, my mother was standing at the door, ready to collect me. We would say our rounds of goodbyes, as the next day we would drive back to Maryland. Right before I left his room, my mom's Uncle Martin called out to me. He said, "Hey, Andrew, take this and remember me." He reached into a drawer in his night table and he handed me a rosary that he had made himself. Fast forward to about a year later, back home in Maryland, I heard the very frightening words, "Andrew, can you come into the kitchen?" Now, my mother would only call me into the kitchen under two established conditions. I was about to be in very serious trouble, or she had bad news. And so my heart began to beat faster as I walked into the kitchen with a very sense of dread, knowing that whatever I was about to hear was not going to be good. I noticed her eyes were red. She looked like she'd been crying. "Andrew, I just want you to know that your Uncle Martin passed away yesterday. You know, back then when I got news that somebody had died, I processed it much like I do now, still, at 57. I don't react. I just go numb. It's like if I take the information in and really process it all at once, I'll fall to the ground. So a large part of me just pretends this isn't real. This isn't happening. Now, I don't recommend this as the way to react. I just don't have any control over it. It's sort of a self-protection mechanism, I guess. It just happens. A good example of this happened back in 1983. My mother was having a hysterectomy, and she almost died on the operating table as her heart had stopped due to the anesthesia. My father picked me up after school. We drove to the hospital, and he was explaining to me what had happened. They got her heart started again, and she was okay. But I was 13 years old, sitting in the passenger seat of the car, listening to all of this in complete silence. I was expressionless. Naturally, this infuriated my father. But for me, what almost happened was simply too enormous to comprehend. And now all of a sudden, Uncle Martin was gone. A man I had only known for 5 hours, a man who meant the world to my mother and his family, gone? I stayed by my mother in the kitchen and consoled her. And then something strange happened. A few weeks later, I started to feel differently. I felt stronger. But most of all, I felt that my feet were connected to the earth in a way I had never experienced before. I walked with a different confidence. I had a different gratitude for the very life I was living. And now I think I understand it better today than I did then at 17. For perhaps the first time, I understood that I came from somewhere. I wasn't simply a 17-year-old kid from suburban Maryland trying to figure out where I was going. There were people before me. The farmers, the musicians, the mothers, the fathers, the people who lived through wars, people who lived through depression, people who filled dance halls with music, people who fell in love, people who endured things I could barely imagine. And somehow their lives eventually became connected to mine. As we know, trees have roots, but those roots spend years growing beneath the soil. We don't see them. We just tend to look at the branches. We think about, who am I becoming? Where am I going? What will I accomplish? How high will I climb in this life? But sometimes strength doesn't come from reaching higher. Sometimes strength comes from discovering how deep your roots really go. And my great Uncle Martin was one of those roots in my family tree. And after that afternoon, part of his story had become part of mine. I had only known Martin for 5 hours. Yet nearly 40 years later, I'm telling you this story. We assume influence requires years. Sometimes a human being gets one afternoon. And sometimes I wonder, what if my mother hadn't made me go? What if she had just simply taken me with her that day? I would probably know Uncle Martin mostly as a name, maybe a photograph. Maybe somebody would say, you know, Uncle Martin used to play the drums. But instead I heard his voice, I heard about his life. I sat across from him, and I could begin linking pieces of his life to mine. My mother knew exactly what she was doing that day. She wasn't simply finding somewhere for her teenage son to go and spend the afternoon. She was introducing one generation to another. And that brings us back to Alex Haley. The family is a link to our past and is a bridge to our future. I wonder, though, if something has changed in modern life in a way, because for most of human history, tradition was built directly into everyday living. Families often lived together, meals were shared more regularly, stories were repeated because there was no digital archive to preserve them for us. Skills were taught person to person. Songs and recipes were handed down, religious traditions, holiday rituals, family sayings, stories, even occupations. One generation had to physically teach the next generation, but the structure of daily life has changed. Technology changed it. Mobility changed it. Careers changed it. Culture changed it. And in some ways, we've begun outsourcing memory. Our phones remember birthdays for us now. The cloud stores our photographs. The internet stores our recipes. GPS remembers how we get somewhere, and our devices remember things we once had to carry in our own minds. Families have also become geographically scattered. Modern transportation gave us extraordinary freedom to move across the country or across the world. But there's a trade-off. See, grandparents and grandchildren may see each other only a few times a year. Brothers and sisters can live thousands of miles apart, and entertainment itself has become more individual. Once a family might gather around one radio, then one television. Today, 6 people are in a room looking at 6 different screens. So instead of, hey, we do this every Christmas, Grandpa tells the same story every year, Mom always cooks this meal, we go to this place every summer, we play this song on your birthday, repetition says this matters enough that we're going to do it again and again. But modern culture constantly gives us something new, the next show, the next device, the next trend, the next place. And maybe we've also become individualistic. Modern culture constantly asks, who do you want to become? What do you want? What is your passion? And those are valuable questions, but previous generations may have been more likely to ask, where do I come from? Who are my people? And what do I owe the people around me? Now, I'm not suggesting technology destroyed tradition at all. Actually, technology may give us the greatest opportunity in history to preserve it. My granddaughter can go study in Spain and FaceTime with us here at home. We can record our grandparents telling their stories. We can digitize family photographs. We can preserve recipes. We can build family trees. Technology can be an eraser, but it can also be an amplifier. The choice is ours. There was no cloud archive of my great Uncle Martin. No podcast interview, no 20 hours of video, no folder filled with recordings. I got 5 hours with him in a room. And that's what survived 40 years later. And I become the archive, essentially. His story is still alive because someone listened. And that brings us to something even deeper. We're not isolated individuals walking around trying to find ourselves. Part of who we are comes from the people that came before us. Knowing their mistakes, their traditions, their humor, their pain, their music, their beliefs, their love. Psychologically knowing that story gives us context. That's what I want you to take away today. When we know what the people before us survived, built, lost, loved, and carried, our own life begins to fit into a larger picture. We begin to understand I am part of something bigger than myself. And families also create stories about themselves. Every family has them. We're survivors. We take care of each other. We work hard. We laugh through the difficult times. We don't quit. Families hand down stories whether they realize it or not, and those stories can become incredibly powerful. So here's an important question. What story does your family tell about itself? An even more important one would be, is that story helping the next generation, or is it limiting them? Because honoring your roots does not mean repeating everything that came before you. Some traditions deserve to be prepared. Some patterns deserve to end. Some things are inheritance. Others become legacy. And there's an important difference. Inheritance is what you receive, but legacy is what you choose to pass forward. So think about it. What am I keeping? What am I changing? And what stops with me? The magic of this story that I wanted to tell you is that yesterday, our family gathered for dinner as we gave our granddaughter well wishes before she gets ready to study abroad. And then something magical happened. Just like Uncle Martin had given me his rosary, at the last minute, while my granddaughter was opening her gifts, my wife walked into the bedroom. And she came back carrying a silver necklace with a cross on it. Something about the moment felt incredibly familiar. That necklace and cross had belonged to her mother, and she handed it to our granddaughter, Gabriella. Think about that. An ordinary object can become extraordinary because of the story attached to it. A necklace, a rosary, a watch, a handwritten recipe. To somebody else, it might be worth $20, but to your family, it becomes priceless because objects sometimes become containers for memory. And now a necklace that belonged to one generation and then another is traveling to the future. And that is Alex Haley's bridge. So what I want you to take away today is that family gives us 3 extraordinary gifts. Number 1, they give us roots. This is where we come from. Roots tell us our story. Who came before us? What did they survive? What did they build? Who did they love? Knowing your roots does not trap you in the past, but it gives you a stronger place from which to grow. The second thing that families give us is belonging. I am part of something larger than myself. There is enormous psychological strength in knowing that your life didn't simply just begin with you. You are one chapter in a much longer story. And that doesn't diminish your individuality, but it gives your individuality context. The third thing you get is continuity. Now it's my turn to carry something forward. Eventually, we stop simply receiving the family story. We become responsible for carrying part of it. And someday, you become the ancestor Just thinking of that stops me, because one day somebody may tell a story about you. A granddaughter, a grandson, a niece, a nephew, someone who hasn't even been born yet. And they may say, let me tell you about this person. What will they say? That is where this becomes actionable. This week, find an older person in your family and ask them 5 questions. Yeah, I'm serious. Ask, what were you like when you were 17? What was one of the hardest periods of your life? Who influenced you the most? What do you wish you had understood sooner? And finally, what do you hope our family never forgets? And then do something that matters with it. Record it, write it down, save it. Because we have never had more technology for preserving family history, and perhaps we have never been worse in intentionally passing it down. So don't assume someone else will remember. Become the archive, and then ask yourself the very question at the center of today's episode. What are you carrying forward? Not money, not possessions, but what's the story? The value, the tradition. What lessons, what strength, what piece of someone who came before you? And I also ask, what are you choosing not to carry forward? So remember, roots, belonging, and continuity. Know where you came from. Understand what it gave you. Then consciously decide what deserves to cross that bridge into the future. Because someday, what you carry forward may become the roots beneath someone else. And perhaps that's one of the greatest gifts of family. Now I know where my passion for music and playing the drums comes from. It comes from my great Uncle Martin, who passed it on to my mother, and she passed it on to me. All right, so that is today's episode. And if this podcast made a positive impact on you, please share it with someone else who you think needs to hear it. And I would truly appreciate a quick rating or review on whatever platform you hear me on. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming up next on the Leading Life Podcast. I'm Andy Zook. Remember, I want you to lead with purpose, live with intention, and keep becoming who you were meant to be. But most importantly, go out and be the hero in somebody's story today. And maybe you will do that by just connecting with a member of your family that you don't know that well and learn their story. You'll be the hero to them. Trust me, people have a story inside of them and they want to be heard, and you can pass it on to your family. I can't wait to talk to you on the next episode. Thanks for listening. Take care. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.